Now, if you're anything like me, you're going to dread doing a job interview. Thankfully, I've not had to do one for absolutely ages, and long may that continue. But if you do have an interview coming up, and that will certainly be the case for a number of final seat trainees who are due to qualify in spring 2020, then hopefully my latest vlog will be a useful resource to help you with that all-important preparation. So first things first, let's assume that you get some positive feedback from the employer recruiter confirming that they'd like to meet with you for an interview. When you decide when to sort of book that in for, have a think about whether you're a morning person, an afternoon person, and so on. For me, doing a morning interview, although I'd love to get it out of the way, would be practically quite tricky because it takes me forever to get into London. However, the advantage of doing the interview in the morning is that I'm also a little bit of a worrier, and I know that if I had the meeting scheduled for 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd spend the entire day a nervous wreck. So, as I said, do what works well for you, but do try also to be flexible, because the more available you are for the interviews, the more quickly it can get sort of booked in for. Once the interview is confirmed, then the next thing, of course, is to start preparation in earnest. I cannot stress enough the importance of being really well prepared. I know if I'd got into an interview or indeed a client meeting without having done any background reading on who I'm meeting or the organisation, it would be an absolute car crash. So please don't leave anything to chance. Your preparation should, of course, focus on 2 things. Number 1, your CV. It's a given that you should know that inside out, but also do some background reading into the firm or organisation you're meeting. So that could be on their own website, in the legal directories, or legal press. Also have a chat with any contacts you have who may have the inside track on what's going on in that team or department. LinkedIn is also really helpful for looking up the people you'll be meeting, assuming that you've been given the names of the interviewers. LinkedIn is a valuable source for seeing where people have worked previously, how long they've been in their current role for, etc., which is obviously a good way to sort of start questions when you get to that point. On the day of the interview, the obvious things to remember are making sure you allow enough time to get to the interview. If you don't know where the organisation is based, prepare your journey the day in advance so there are no last-minute hiccups. Upon entering the building, it's worth remembering that your interview pretty much starts the minute you start talking to reception. So remember, good posture, decent levels of eye contact, a firm handshake. It's also worth thinking about how you come across at the interview. I know certainly for a lot of the lawyers I work with, many know what to say but aren't entirely sure how to say it. When you're nervous, inevitably you start talking a little bit rapidly. So try to slow down. If it helps, then it's even worth recording yourself generating some of the answers just to see how you come across. One technique I think that works really well when delivering answers and putting together sort of the content of what you're going to say is to use a 3 bullet point principle. That works really well to add structure. You'll find that it also slows you down, and as if by magic, having those 3 bullet points makes your answers about the right length as well. Now, in terms of the interview itself, the format of the interview is relatively similar whether you're interviewing for an NQ position or a more senior role. The interviews typically start with questions centred around your sort of motivations for looking. They can be questions about, why now, why that particular firm or team, what are your longer term plans, so on and so forth. One consideration for NQ candidates who don't have an internal offer is how to deal with that elephant in the room. Obviously, lying is not a good thing at this point because it will come to bite you in the bum. So, think about how you're going to sugarcoat the position and to present your sort of position in the most positive light possible. Once the interviewers have discussed your sort of motivations, they quickly move on to the sort of main thrust of the interview, which is getting you to talk about the work you've been involved in. Now, most of you will be familiar with competency-based interviews. Interviews for lawyers don't tend to be explicitly competency-based, in that the partners will tend to just ask you quite open-ended questions about work you've been involved in. So it's really up to you to make sure that key competencies that you want to convey to the interviewers are sort of sprinkled into your answers. With that in mind, not only will the partners want to know or want to be able to see you talk about a deal or case intelligently, they also would be interested to find out your contribution to that piece of work. So it's really important to start your answers with the word I. So I was involved in this, I led, I negotiated, I drafted, rather than we did this and our client did that. Remember, an interview is a sales pitch about yourself. It's the one opportunity in life when you really get to major on what you're about rather than the team. The final sort of portion of the interview, as I sort of hinted at earlier, will be questions for the interviewer. Now, nothing makes my heart sink more than when doing a practice interview and ending the sort of run by asking the interviewee, whether they've got any questions for me, and they then say to me, no. Now, that's just going to leave a really bad lasting impression on the interviewers. So it's really worth you having a sort of list of questions up your sleeves that you're going to ask. Now, when it comes to what's appropriate or not, the best starting point is to think about whether or not you genuinely want to know the answer. Authenticity is key when doing interviews. Once you've got those questions that you want to know the answers to, have a think about whether you could get those answered either through a basic internet search or through other sources. If so, then the question is perhaps a little bit too basic. Safe questions centre around strategy, workflow, what's the pipeline of work looking like for the team, culture, and training. Anyway, that's all I've got time for. Interviews, quite complex, so sorry that I don't have time to go into all these points in a lot of detail, but hopefully they give you some sort of steer on sort of areas of focus. Thank you for listening.